As soon as you heard his voice, you knew it could only be Johnny Cash.
I went down, 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 and the flames went high.
Yeah, well, things come and go, but Johnny Cash he's a built-in style.
Somehow, we always knew that he was the man in black, that he stood a little taller than everybody else.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
For over 40 years, Johnny Cash towered over the landscape of American music.
Johnny Cash's music was unique in American music because his voice was unique.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
And his songs were very, very simple in a country sort of way. And they communicated with this stark sort of...
From prison yards to concert halls, Cash dominated the scene as the mythic Man in Black.
You just felt that he was kind of truth personified. Especially as he got older, he never tried to hide the fact that he was a bad boy and was self-destructive.
I've never seen another actor or individual be able to handle just about any situation. When the Man in Black walks on that stage, everybody stood at attention.
You can't buy that. You can't go to school and learn that. You know, it's just something you have or you don't have.
Johnny was driven not just by the chords of a rhythm guitar, but by the forces of good and evil that shaped him as an artist and survivor.
June would always say to me that there's two guys there. There's John, and then there's Cash. And I think there's the contradiction. I think there was a dark side to John that he battled with all the time. He was also a guy who really dug deep, as he would say, into the gnarly truth.
His wife, June Carter Cash, brought John through the dark times, and the intensity of their union never waned through the years.
They had obviously a great love, but there was a lot of humor and playfulness there. They probably didn't let each other get away with stuff. I think they celebrated each other.
In his 60s, Johnny became a hit with the MTV generation when he put his own stamp on some hard rock songs.
I was very impressed by his open-mindedness towards rock music, where a lot of people in the country field are very narrow and prejudiced and really don't want to hear about nothing that challenges any of their viewpoints or beliefs. Well, Cash would actually embrace these things.
It was Johnny's mother, Carrie, who brought music into his life and first recognized his talent.
She looked for musical ability in all of us, and she sensed right away that Johnny had that talent, and just picked up real quick what she tried to teach him.
Johnny, known as JR to his family, was one of 7 children. Times were hard, and making a living wasn't easy. The entire family worked long hours in the fields of their small cotton farm in Arkansas.
I remember the big bales of cotton my daddy would pull to the cotton gin, 2 miles away in town on the wagon with a team of mules. I remember the pump outside was the water we had, the artesian well. We didn't have running water until I was 13.
After long days in the field, Johnny turned to the radio to hear the galaxy of country stars who inspired him. Eddie Arnold, Hank Williams, Ernest Tubbs, and the legendary Carter family.
When Daddy would go to sleep, we would slip back in, especially JR, would slip back in and turn the radio on and listen to a few more songs or listen to the Grand Ole Opry.
And I'm sure he began to think that he could do that. I know very often he would write a poem and he would quote that to us in the field, or he would read that to us or say, listen to this and see how this sounds. And then later on he began to put those poetic writings into music.
His father saw his son's interest in music as so much frivolity.
My grandfather was a hard man, and he didn't give approval or love. I can't imagine what it was like for my dad as being this very sensitive, gentle, musical, artistic child, and having this parent who didn't recognize it really. And not only didn't recognize it, but was kind of brutal.
It was to his brother Jack that Johnny often turned for approval, even though he was only 2 years older.
They did a lot of things together. They worked a lot together, and they played a lot together. And they became very close because they had so much in common.
When Jack was 14, he took an extra job to help the family make ends meet. He cut oak trees into fence posts at the local high school for $3 a day. Then, on May 12, 1944, Jack fell on a table saw and was critically injured.
I saw my dad cry, and I saw my dad fall on his knees and pray and ask God to spare Jack's life if it was his will.
Jack clung to life for a week while the family stood vigil at the hospital, hoping for a miracle. But at 6:42 a.m. on May 20th, 1944, Jack Cash died. The loss was devastating for 12-year-old Johnny.
When God saw fit to take Jack, then it left Johnny very, very empty. And I saw him more or less draw into a quiet, subdued feeling.
I don't think my dad can be read or understood out of the context of him losing his brother, because I think that that was the most significant event of his life, and it changed him permanently. And after that, I think he was driven by his grief.
The one place Johnny found solace was in his music. At 17, Johnny's singing won him top prize of $5 in a local amateur contest. In 1950, he got to go on a senior class trip to the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, the temple of country music. The fabled Carter family was on the bill there, and Johnny was captivated by June Carter.
You know, what she did it with such ease and with such comfort. And I think he liked that about her. She came on so strong. And June was quite a comedian. And she would run I Love Lucy a close race.
No, you're a good old boy, Ray.
Well, thank you, June.
You're a nice-looking boy. Look at that hair. You got beautiful hair.
Thank you.
No. Don't hand it to me. Just let me admire it from you.
Johnny Cash vowed that he would meet June one day, but their paths would not cross again for 6 years. The Iron Curtain had fallen, the Cold War was underway, and America was about to enter a bloody conflict with Korea. Johnny Cash would have to face one of the most crucial career decisions of his life.
When he came home from the Air Force, he brought tapes of songs that he had written and sang into the tape recorder. And I thought they were pretty good. I thought, boy, you know, he's a pretty good singer and a pretty good songwriter, but it never dawned on me that this J.R. Cash person was going to become the biggest superstar in the history of the music business.
In June 1950, the United States entered the Korean War. Johnny had no real prospects at home, so at the age of 19, he signed up for a 4-year hitch in the U.S. Air Force. He took off for Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. It was soon discovered that Johnny had an uncanny aptitude for deciphering Morse code. He was given top security clearance and sent to Landsberg, Germany, where he proved an ace at intercepting messages from the Soviet Union. By the end of his tour, the Air Force badly wanted Johnny to re-enlist and promoted him to staff sergeant. But Johnny was not prepared to give up his dreams and turn his back on a career in music. He'd also fallen in love with a young woman he'd met during basic training in Texas, Vivian Liberto. They had continued to correspond.
So basically here were two people who kind of didn't know each other, in person. And they just went right ahead and got married.
On August 7th, 1954, Johnny married Vivian in a Catholic ceremony in San Antonio. Then, 22-year-old Johnny Cash and his new bride took off for Memphis, where he could better pursue his ambitions as a singer. But being a breadwinner meant having a day job, so he went to work as an appliance salesman.
I remember going in the store one day when he was working there, and he had a suit and tie on. He looked pretty sharp to me. I kind of wanted to buy something, because my brother was the salesman. But his heart was in his music, and that began to be obvious to all of us.
During this period, Johnny's older brother Roy worked at an auto repair shop in Memphis and introduced him to two musical mechanics. Marshall Grant played bass, and Luther Perkins played the electric guitar. They were billed as Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two. On stage, the three musicians often appeared in what would become a signature color for Cash, black.
And of course, with he and Luther and Marshall, they did wear black because that was, you know, kind of the uniform of the day, and didn't show any dirt, and it was cheap, you know, and it looked good on stage and like that, so that's kind of where the black outfits got started.
Johnny desperately wanted his shot and went to the man who could make it happen, the head honcho of Sun Records, Sam Phillips.
I was impressed with his voice, period. Voices have always fascinated me. As someone speaking to me on the phone or just saying hello, somehow or another I'm drawn to that type of thing. Right off, I was drawn to Johnny Cash's voice.
Johnny was given the chance to record a song he wrote called Hey Porter, but to put out a single, he needed a number for the flip side. He wrote the love song Cry, Cry, Cry. It defined the trademark Cash style.
I think you only live to see the light up down. I wasted my time when I would try. When the lights have lost the glow, you're gonna cry, cry, cry.
Johnny's style wasn't quite country and wasn't quite rock and roll. It was unique.
Johnny Cash was talking right directly to you. Baby, you're gonna cry, cry, cry. And you know, with that monotone voice of his and that sound, that tick-tack-tack-tack-tack, you know, golly.
Nobody sounded like him. There was an energy and an edginess, something dark, even when I was too young to know what the dark was, something primal that he had a handle on, that he was connected to.
By the spring of 1955, the single that featured Hey Porter and Cry, Cry, Cry had sold 100,000 copies in the southern states alone. Johnny had made it virtually overnight and started touring with none other than Elvis Presley. He signed a recording contract with Sun Records and turned out another hit, Folsom Prison Blues.
I'm stuck in Folsom Prison.
The first time I ever heard him on radio was just amazing because I just about wrecked my car on the Hollywood freeway. It was Folsom Prison Blues. I thought he sounded like he looked, which was that big rugged sound, and he didn't disappoint me at all.
And I remember laying on a towel on the beach with my radio, and when he would come on, I would jump up and holler to everybody, "Hey, listen, this is my brother. Listen, this is my brother."
With royalties from his records, Johnny was able to buy a new home and a used pink and black Lincoln. He and Vivian also celebrated the arrival of their first child, Roseanne, on May 24th, 1955. But for all the happiness and comfort his success provided, Vivian was wary of the pitfalls of show business life. Johnny put his own feelings about the temptations of life on the road in a song he wrote in 1956. He wanted to call it Because You're Mine. Carl Perkins suggested that a better title might be I Walk the Line.
Because you're mine, I walk the line.
The song was a mega hit for Cash, climbing to the top of the country charts, where it remained for 43 weeks. It crossed over onto the pop charts and sold more than 2 million copies. I Walk the Line brought Johnny national attention.
Let's have a great big grand ole Opry welcome for Johnny Cash.
For the first time, he was invited to perform at the Grand Ole Opry. There, he finally had his chance to meet June Carter, and though the two were both married at the time, he found that he was still smitten.
She was sitting backstage. He walked up to her and introduced himself, and she said, "I know who you are." And he said, "One day I'm going to marry you." And she just looked up at him and said, "That would be nice."
June Carter wasn't Johnny's only new fan. He went out and stopped the show at the Grand Ole Opry with 6 encores. Back at Sun Records, the hits kept coming. First with Big River, then Guess Things Happen That Way and The Ballad of a Teenage Queen. He sold 6 million records on the Sun label and took his own show on a tour of sold-out houses. Johnny was enjoying these days on the road and the contact with the fans, but his life was about to take a dark turn. To meet the demands of performing night after night, he started taking amphetamines.
I cannot tell you what a magical feeling those amphetamines had on you at the time. And you could stay up for 4 or 5 days at a time. And forget about stage fright. There was no such thing. You walked out and you were king.
But Cash was on a dangerous path. There were tales of mood swings and bizarre incidents. Dumping horse manure in hotel hallways and chopping through the wall of his room with a fire axe.
Well, there were just little mischievous things he would do, like saw off the furniture of a hotel room and make it for small people to enjoy. Like changing the decor of a hotel room from a beautiful designer color to all black to match the wardrobe of the show.
I think a lot of that was just to stay sane, because you realize these were all one-nighters. 300 one-nighters a year. It was a long, long time on the road.
His behavior landed him in jail a few times, and his new outlaw persona created a new constituency for his music. Folsom Prison Blues became an anthem for prison inmates. They identified with the song and the singer, even though Johnny had never done hard time.
He was never sentenced and put away and sent up the river, the way the guy in Folsom Prison Blues is. He has spent some nights in jail when he was a threat to public safety and his own safety. In other words, when he was so high that they just had to put him in the pokey.
By 1958, Johnny felt he had done his time at Sun Records. Sam Phillips would not increase his royalties and refused to make the gospel album Johnny had always wanted to record. After 3 years, in a split that was not amicable, Johnny left Sun and Sam Phillips.
I did not impose my will on any of these quote-unquote potentially creative people. That's what I wanted, is diamonds that had not been touched. Just mind, and then let's shape it and go from there. And so it was an innocent thing that John did that could have happened to any of us. But nonetheless, he left, and I wasn't too happy about it.
Johnny found what he was looking for at Columbia Records, and in 1959, Hymns by Johnny Cash, the first of his many religious albums, was released. Johnny also began appearing more frequently as an actor on television shows and had his sights set on film roles. With his career growing in all directions, he relocated to Southern California.
Johnny's house was the gathering place in Southern California, and he's the only one of our gang that had a pool. So that made his house kind of central for all activities and stuff. And Vivian was a very gracious hostess. Of course, the girls were little, you know.
His family was also growing. Eventually, it would include 4 daughters. Johnny and Vivian looked like the picture-perfect affluent couple, but moments of togetherness were rare. The Cash marriage was crumbling under the weight of Johnny's absences.
My mother loved him and his music and who he was. I don't think she had a clue where that was going, or that he would become so famous, or what that meant, the interference in her private life and how he would be taken away and how he would be so busy and consumed with this. And, you know, it was just completely mind-boggling to her. She couldn't cope with that. She wanted a nice, small, very tidy family life. It wasn't going to happen with him. They were so different.
By the 1960s, Johnny Cash was more than an established recording star. He was emerging as a modern American folk hero. His live performances electrified audiences in big cities and small towns.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
I mean, a great show with Johnny Cash was as good as it gets, believe me, as far as being part of a great show and feeling that elation from the crowd. A lot of times, I would just have to stand out there and say, folks, I'm sorry, but he's not coming back. Good night.
Then, in 1962, June Carter joined his company as a performer. It was a turning point for Johnny, and it wouldn't be long before his boyhood crush on her would blossom into love.
Well, when June and the Carter family started working with him, I saw a big difference in him. I saw that he was working with people that he felt comfortable with and people that could sing his kind of music with him and make it sound even better. And I even asked him myself one time, there's always been some magic between you and the Carter family. How did that come about? And he said, well, that was a bad case of love between me and June.
Inevitably, Johnny's feelings for June strained his marriage to Vivian to the breaking point. Still, she was hoping to keep the family together and, as a devout Catholic, would not consider divorce. Johnny spent less and less time at home and became more dependent on pills.
Then no one really talked to us about what was wrong. It was drugs, but I didn't know what that was, or I just knew that when he did come home, he was very restless and he seemed unhappy, very dark. He seemed like he was tethered to his body with a very thin thread. He was not all there.
Johnny's habit was now demanding up to 100 pills a day, 50 amphetamines to take him up, and 50 assorted pills to bring him down.
I was afraid he was going to die. He came very near death several times when we were on the road together, and I was afraid he was going to die. And we'd be picking up the trade papers and reading about the late and great Johnny Cash.
Cash was never bigger at the box office, but his tours were now marred by cancellations. He even blew a big gig at Carnegie Hall in New York when his voice abandoned him.
I could not see how he could do the Carnegie Hall show. And he did it, and his voice was it was gone. He went, I fell into a burning ring. It was just bad.
And I could just see disappointment written all over his face, although, he was giving it his all, and I think he felt absolutely terrible about it. The audience was very forgiving.
And he apologized to the audience, He said, I hope you'll give me a break and let me and come hear me next time.
In the midst of these troubled times, June Carter and band member Merle Kilgore wrote a song that became a high point in Johnny's career. In Ring of Fire, he took what was basically a slow folk song to a whole new level by using instruments unheard of in country music. He told June that the idea for the orchestration came to him in a dream.
She said, John, tell Merle what you dreamed. He said, I dreamed I heard trumpets, Mexican trumpets, playing the Ring of Fire.
Released in June of 1963, Ring of Fire was a sensation and rose to #1 on the country charts.
I looked at June and she winked at me and I said, we have got a monster.
Though Johnny Cash was an ambassador of country music, his views were in tune with many of those in the folk music world. In 1964, he appeared at the Newport Folk Festival.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
Johnny began collaborating with folk and rock artists like Bob Dylan.
Take one, Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan.
Bob was a very big fan, still is. Used to use Cash as a musical sort of example in this, something like Cash would do, this or that. And I know he admires him as a man.
Johnny's experiments with drugs were now getting him into serious trouble. On one visit home in 1965, he took his black van into the California hills and, apparently high on drugs, accidentally started a forest fire. He was fined close to $100,000.
So it was always something like that. Always these very dramatic, catastrophic things happening. I mean, I was literally on the edge of my seat for my entire childhood, waiting for something else terrible to happen to my dad.
But Cash directed the bulk of his destructive energy toward himself. He was losing weight rapidly and was described as looking like walking death.
He became very unpredictable. He's always been loving and kind and gentle and, would do anything in the world for anybody. And his personality changed drastically in the early 1960s. It became so bad that I was almost sure he was going to die.
By 1965, the prescriptions for pills Johnny was able to get from a variety of doctors could not keep up with his needs. Desperate, he bought a huge amount of pills in Mexico and was arrested in El Paso when he tried to bring them across the border. Cash was in free fall, and he knew it.
That's part of the pain that comes from addiction, is that not only are you destroying your physical self, but all your potential and your gifts and your goals and your love and your relationships, that they're all going down with the ship.
In early October of 1967, Johnny Cash was still in the middle of a long downward spiral, a losing battle with addiction to drugs. He hadn't slept or eaten in days, and he was feeling he'd wasted his life. Desolate, he walked one day into an old cave on the outskirts of Chattanooga. He hoped he would never come out alive.
But he couldn't die. His body would not cooperate with him, and he also had a kind of vision, as he put it. He didn't see anything, didn't see any angels, didn't hear any voices or anything, but just got the very clear idea that this was not his time to die.
After hours in total blackness, he emerged from the cave to find June Carter and his mother waiting for him. They took him back to his home near Nashville, and over the next few weeks, June saw Johnny through a harrowing withdrawal. It was days and nights of tortured sleep and terrible nightmares. But finally, with June's love and support, Johnny came around.
She really believed in him and wanted to protect him and wanted him to get off drugs. And, I think she saw a vision for his future that maybe he wasn't even aware of at the time.
June Carter was also a devout Christian, and Johnny drew strength from her religious convictions. His own renewed faith helped him return to the stage he loved in November of 1967. He performed without the aid of drugs for the first time in a decade, but his personal life was still in disarray. In a surprising turn of events, his wife Vivian agreed to divorce. She had become convinced it was in the best interest of the family.
I remember feeling greatly relieved. Like maybe they can both have a chance to be happy separately now.
12 years earlier, at the Grand Ole Opry, Johnny predicted he would one day marry June Carter. And he did on March 1st, 1968. It marked the beginning of one of the longest and happiest unions in show business.
I think that's so cute. June used to date Elvis Presley a long time ago. And a friend of hers said something like, you probably got a really valuable collection of Elvis stuff, all that. And she goes, what? And he goes, all those letters he wrote you and clothes and this and that. She said, well, John threw all that in the lake. And I found that charming,
Johnny was so in love with June Carter. I've never seen anybody that much in love with somebody. And it's just carried throughout the years.
I'll tell you what, you go on the road for about 3 or 4 days, and it's been hectic. It's been hit the road, do the show, go to bed, go to sleep. And every once in a while I'll say, hey, you love me. And she said, of course. I said, well, come and give me a big hug. Or she'll do the same thing, And we take a break from it, We stop the rat race and we hold on to each other for a little while.
By the end of the 1960s, the Man in Black was, more than ever, the favorite headliner at prisons around the country.
Well, the prisoners loved what he was doing, and they appreciated his being there because he was for the underdog, and that was his persona, and they felt that he cared about them if maybe no one else did, and there was some purpose to still get out of there and not just deteriorate.
Johnny recorded a live concert at Folsom Prison in 1968 that was a landmark in his career. The album quickly earned gold and then platinum records. On his next release, Johnny Cash at San Quentin, he performed a novelty song that became a huge breakout hit.
Well, I don't blame him 'cause he run and hid, but the meanest thing that he ever did was before he left, he went and named me Sue.
I remember when John was on stage late in the show and he decided to sing A Boy Named Sue for the first time. He really hadn't memorized the lyrics that Shel Silverstein had written. So he read the lyrics while he was singing the song, but the prisoners just went wild. It was really a happening that night.
He was big and bent and gray and old, and I looked at him and my blood ran cold. I said, "My name is Sue."
A Boy Named Sue became Johnny's first top 10 hit on the pop charts. By the end of 1969, Johnny's records accounted for an amazing 1 out of every 5 albums sold in the United States. That same year, he became one of the first major country stars to headline a network television variety show.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
People like Bob Dylan, who would never have been seen by hardcore country music fans had it not been for that show. So it was a very groundbreaking show in a lot of ways.
If Johnny was thriving in his public life, he seemed content at last in his personal life as well. To add to their blessings, Johnny and June welcomed a son, John Carter Cash, on March 3, 1970. For Johnny, the baby heralded a new era of personal, professional, and spiritual growth. Then, at the age of 48, the country singer from the cotton fields of Arkansas became the youngest living person ever inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Johnny's father, Ray, who thought that music would be his son's downfall, was there to honor his achievement. Ironically, it was from this great height that Johnny began to tumble into a period of obscurity. The Cash sound seemed to be out of fashion, and his record sales were dwindling. But there was still the touring. In 30 years, his love of the road had never diminished, and everywhere his fans came out for him in large numbers. Then, after undergoing eye surgery in 1981, whether from old demons or new troubles, Johnny relapsed into a serious addiction to painkillers and alcohol. His family knew he would have to get clean or die.
So we did an intervention. We just kind of said we weren't going to stand for it anymore and how badly we had been treated because he was so messed up, and he was going to treatment, and that was it. And he was tremendously relieved.
In 1983, Johnny entered the Betty Ford Center for Rehabilitation. Over the next 2 months, the intensive program there helped him turn his life around once again. It was now time to turn around his professional fortunes. In 1985, he teamed up with a group of old friends to form the Highwaymen. Johnny joined forces with Chris Christopherson, Willie Nelson, and Waylon Jennings.
Everybody says it's Mount Rushmore, it's the 4 of them together. And also they were all old friends. And so it was just boys palling around, go out on the road together and make these records. They had a great time together.
He was big and bent and gray and old, and I looked at him and my blood ran cold, and I said, "My name is Sue. How do you do?" How you doing, John?
The group was an instant hit, but even with their exhilarating success, Johnny was dropped by Columbia Records. It was the end of a spectacular creative and commercial run of almost 3 decades.
When Johnny was dropped from Columbia Records, Dwight Yoakam went to see the president of Columbia Nashville and walked in and said, "How dare you do this to Johnny Cash?" And he pointed at the desk that he was sitting at, and he said, "Johnny Cash bought that desk that you're sitting at for you. How dare you?"
In 1988, Johnny Cash almost died when he developed pneumonia after double bypass surgery. His recovery took a long time, but by 1994, he was back on the road, touring again. One memorable performance during this year was a return engagement at Carnegie Hall. He shared the stage with his daughter, Roseanne.
I sang I Still Miss Someone with him, and it was so sweet for both of us. It was like we healed a part of our relationship in that song on that stage, which is the way he heals a lot of things, you know, stage. Is the way he works out a lot of his life is on stage in front of a lot of people.
Johnny now made a move that surprised many people. He teamed up with producer Rick Rubin, known for his work with offbeat young bands like the Beastie Boys and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But Rubin's take on his music was just what Cash needed.
I think that when we started working together, he got reinvigorated. And he was really excited first that people cared to want to really work with him to make good records and take as long as it took, really put the effort in. And then in return, seeing the response, I think invigorated him even more.
Johnny's first release on Rubin's American Recordings label won a Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album. And on the second, he took a huge creative leap by choosing to record Rusty Cage. It had been a hit for the rock group Soundgarden.
It's a really aggressive, heavy metal record. And I played it for John, and he just shook his head like he really thought I was crazy.
I'm gonna break my rusty cage and run.
Of course, the first time that I heard it and heard that it was going to go on the record, I was thrilled. I mean, and I also couldn't believe just how simply, they made this song go, and it sounded to me like a Johnny Cash song. And that, I think, considering all the things I've done in my career, I was probably the most excited by that.
As the 1990s came to a close, Johnny Cash was suffering from the effects of chronic illnesses, asthma, glaucoma, diabetes, and a debilitating nervous system disorder that doctors at first misdiagnosed as Parkinson's. But in May of 2003, it was Johnny's wife, June, in the hospital for bypass surgery. 8 days after the bypass, at the age of 73, she died of complications from the operation. For the first time in over 35 years, John was without his staunchest supporter, his true companion.
When June went, I always got the feeling that John, he wasn't going to do very well without her. He had his music, and he would say that that's what I have, and he focused his attention on his music.
In his fourth release for American Records, Johnny once again revamped a hard rock song. This one, titled Hurt, told of the devastating effects of addiction, and the searing video gripped music fans of all ages.
I hurt myself today to see if I still feel.
That's an extraordinarily painful video to watch, and yet I think it set the standard for why should we even bother with this form of music video if we can't reach people and touch people, and the way he did with that song and his performance and the images and that brutal honesty.
And instead of going and trying to make it, a whitewashed version of his life, when he's singing the song, he's really sort of taking you into something that is so personal. That I think at the end of that, even though it was sad to me, I also felt privileged. And I felt like here's a guy that's pretty much fearless when it comes to art and music. And, that's a great role model to have.
It really opened up a new audience for him. I can't think of anyone else that has done that in their late 60s. He was unique in that.
The video was nominated for 6 MTV Music Awards. Johnny had hoped to attend the ceremonies in New York, but poor health kept him at home. Johnny's health continued to decline, and just a few weeks after the awards show, he was rushed to the hospital. He died there on September 12th of respiratory failure at the age of 71.
He told me that just before he passed away, he went up to visit June, and he said, "I'll be with you soon."
In one sense, I felt he was free. The pain that he was going through without June was just something that people who had that kind of relationship, I don't think we can imagine it. I think it was intolerably painful for him, and I just felt that he was at peace.
Though Johnny Cash is gone, for his legions of fans, he will remain the American troubadour who embraced every kind of music and made it his own.
There was never any doubt that Johnny Cash's legacy would burn brightly. But in his last years, he took steps to make sure the story was told right, getting involved in the pre-production of the highly anticipated biopic, Walk the Line.
John was heavily involved in the script and the screenplay to get it right.
Joaquin Phoenix stars opposite Reese Witherspoon as a young Johnny Cash and June Carter, finding their footing in love and launching their musical careers.
This song's for your ward.
Johnny Cash, the iconic Man in Black, is a memory that still strikes a chord in all walks of life.